Okay, I guess I'm not getting introduced or anything. All right, hey guys, my name is Jimmy Song, and I am going to present on learnings from teaching over 500 developers. That's a little old. I have taught more people since I had that number up there. Okay, all right, so you guys can see it over there. Great. I know that like learnings about how people learn and stuff like that might not be that interesting. So one of the things that I want to sort of make it relevant to you is to talk about how you can get a deeper understanding of Bitcoin. So this is all in the context of helping the ecosystem, and you'll hear this from me over and over again, which is that in order to get better as a community, we're going to have to sort of level up in sort of technical understanding of what Bitcoin is. And that's something that I'm going to be pushing. Anyway, here, the class that I teach is a 2-day, very intensive course, and let's go over a couple of things about it. So first question that you might be asking is, why do people take my class, right? Like, what's the point? Why are people doing it? Well, first reason is because Bitcoin can be very intimidating, and many of you probably know what I'm talking about. People are talking about stuff with all these complex words that you might not understand or not have heard of or don't have a real conceptual identification with. So it can be very, very intimidating. And a classroom environment tends to be a lot safer rather than like arguing on Twitter or something. Second, it is kind of difficult to understand, especially the computer science aspects can be very hard to sort of grasp. There's a lot of math involved. Cryptography in particular can just sort of seem like a black box where you don't really know what's going on. And finally, a lot of people, they have trouble motivating themselves to learn something that's intimidating and difficult to understand because, hey, there's a lot to learn, and people are like, hey, if I take a class, then that'll sort of help me to learn much more quickly. And unsurprisingly, these are the same things that I ran into back in 2013 when I got started as a Bitcoin developer. And that's, it was very intimidating. It was very difficult to understand, and it was hard to get motivated to learn all of this stuff. And this is partly why I created the course, right? Like it's to help other developers to understand what's going on and get bootstrapped into development a lot quicker. So what does my class consist of? Well, it's a couple of days. It's 2 days, 8 hours each day, so it's a very intense course. And you have to basically code your own Bitcoin library in Python. And this involves me lecturing for a few minutes, then the students going and coding what I just lectured about, and then I lecture again, and then students go and code what I just lectured about. And this over and over again, 8 hours each day. You can imagine it's very intense because you're constantly doing something. And it's, most of the time when you give a lecture, there's always 1 or 2 heads that nod off or something like that. And not that that hasn't happened, but the vast majority of people, because they're forced to code, they have to just keep up with it more or less. And lastly, because it's a classroom setting, people learn together, right? Like they're in an environment where they're trying to help each other. Maybe they're being a little bit competitive with each other. Oh, that person finished. Oh man, I feel kind of stupid because I haven't finished yet. Like there's sort of that CrossFit element to it, right? Where you're seeing other people do something and you want to do it just as well as them. So anyway, so the 3 things that I'm going to tell you that are related to my learnings are read, code, and teach. And I'm going to go over that again and again. Read, code, and teach. And this is really how I think people can learn things very much better and in a solid and hardened way. So reading. So let's talk about that. So one of the learnings that I've gotten from teaching over 500 developers is people think they know more than they do, right? Like they have some conception of something and they think they know what that means. But it turns out that when I start describing what's going on and telling them, okay, well, here's what the actual thing is, then they start going, oh my God, I really didn't understand this stuff. Here is an excerpt of a letter that I had a scholarship winner write to the scholarship, to the people that provided the scholarship. And this is what it is. To be honest, if it wasn't for the scholarship, I never would have considered attending programming blockchain. More than the cost, I arrogantly thought that having a computer science background meant that I somehow already understood Bitcoin, or that I could always fill in the gaps with a bit of light reading. How would a 2-day seminar help? Oh man, what a wake-up call. Within a few short minutes of sitting down, reality set in. The scope of the task ahead was made clear. We were to digest a semester's worth of new material in 2 days while solving programming puzzles at unrelenting pace. The average technical ability was insanely high, and I felt like the dunce of the class. It was indeed a huge challenge, but one that was immensely satisfying. Each puzzle would build upon the previous ones until we finally built up enough layers of understanding to create, parse, and verify transactions and blocks with our own code. Now we can build our own wallets, right? Like, that's the kind of insight that you get when you actually learn it. You realize you actually didn't know it that well before. And this is a critical part of the learning process, is that you may think that you know something, but until you actually try it, you don't actually know.
To know enough that you don't know.
Yeah. All right, second learning is that most students are actually really surprised by how much they learn. And the classroom format that I have is 2 days, 8 hours a day. And they're just kind of like, wow, I can't believe I learned that much, because it's about a semester's worth of material, and I mean this literally. I taught this at the University of Texas, same material over half a semester, 3 hours each week, right? Like, that's about a semester's worth of material. And they're surprised that they can get it there. And the reason why they can is because they're kind of forced to be focused, right? Like, you trap them in a room, and I even make sure to order lunch so that they don't leave the room for lunch or anything like that. Maybe they can go to the bathroom and whatever, but they are focused and there to learn. And that helps them really concentrate and be able to work on the thing without any distractions. If you're sort of learning at your own pace at home or something like that, that can be good. But in many ways, it's very easy to get distracted and taken off the path. And that's something that a lot of people found valuable. Another one is coding. So learning the concept is one thing. Actually having to code is another. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But that tends to have what I would call a hardening experience of what they learned. And finally, peers. That helps a tremendous amount. Like, having other people around. I mean, I don't know how many of you have done CrossFit or anything like that, or even been on a baseball team, or been in a dance troupe. I don't know. Whatever it is, when you see other people doing something, it gives you confidence to know that you can do it too, right? Almost as a matter of embarrassment. It's kind of like, okay, well, if that person can do it, I can do it. Or if I'm going to feel really stupid if I can't get it and all these other people have. So in that way, it's a reinforcement mechanism when you have a group that's all working towards the same goal, and they're trying to learn all this stuff. All right, so what does this mean for you? How can you apply this? Well, like I said, I think it's very important for all of us to sort of level up in our technical understanding, wherever you are. You might be somebody that hasn't even read the white paper, right? Like, the next step might be reading the white paper and learning what that means. You might be somebody that hasn't coded before. The next step might be learning at least how to read code, right? If you're a developer, then the next step might be like contributing to open source projects that are related to Bitcoin. If you're somebody that's open source contributor, you might want to contribute to Bitcoin Core. There's always sort of like a next step. So how do you get there? Well, the first step is honestly just to go read, right? Like, go and learn some of this stuff and like really absorb it. And this is really good for your investment. Whatever amount of Bitcoin that you may have, by learning yourself, you're ultimately going to make the entire network stronger, because you're going to be able to validate, to the degree that you can, what other people are saying. Finally, if you really want to get serious about this, the way to do it is to take some real focus time. And like distractions tend to be the big thing that causes people to not really learn something. And you know, having focus time, whether it's in a classroom or you know, with other people or something like that, where the purpose is very clear that you're trying to learn it, will help you a lot more. All right. Second thing, code. The first learning about code is that concept is not code. And like knowing the concept of something is not enough to really know it. And this becomes abundantly clear when you look at something like public key cryptography. Now, many of you guys like conceptually know what public key cryptography is. The public key can verify signatures, and the private key can sign things, right? And you know, you kind of have this idea, okay, well, this person can produce something that this other person can verify and things like that. But until you actually look at the math, until you actually look at how everything is implemented, it's not really real to you, right? And until you see what it is that you're signing, how it is that you're verifying, it's not the same. And most of my students, like immediately, like they might understand the lecture, but when they start coding, that's when it really hardens for them, because they're like, oh yeah, he said that, didn't he, right? Like that variable is supposed to be here or there, and that's what we're assigning over here, so I have to do this. It makes a lot more sense once you start coding. Second learning, a lot of them start having a lot more appreciation for the coders of Bitcoin. And here are just 3 small examples of sort of concepts in Bitcoin that become a lot more real to them as I teach. So for example, UTXOs, right? Unspent transaction outputs. Now you might have some conception of what they are, but until you construct a transaction yourself, it's not really that real to you. You don't realize why they're important, or you know why it needs to be optimized and so on. And you know, they start thinking, wow, that's actually a really elegant system for preventing double spends, because it's either spent or unspent. That means that it's binary, and that means you can just sort of get rid of things in memory and things like that. So it gives them an appreciation of the initial design. Another one is Merkle proofs, right? Like I show my students, okay, well, if you have a transaction in a block, here's how you prove that it was in the block without downloading the full block. And the foresight of Satoshi to put the Merkle root into the block header is something that they start appreciating, because they're like, oh, wow, yeah, that's actually really clever. And I never thought of something like that. And finally, SegWit. This is another one that a lot of people kind of get an aha moment about, is they learn about it, they learn how it's very cleverly backwards compatible and so on. And usually the question that they ask is, wait, why was that controversial? Why were people like fudding it so much? It's not controversial at all. It has a precedent in pay-to-script hash, and you know, it allows for upgrades, and it increases the block size. Why was this controversial at all? They start thinking about what it is, what SegWit was about, instead of just sort of voices on both sides that say, okay, well, you know, this might be the reality, or this might be the reality. I can't really verify because I'm not technical enough. Once you know, it's very easy to verify, and very easy to, well, not very easy, but it's easier to evaluate things. Anyway, what does this mean for you? What does this mean for you? Well, at the risk of getting banned from Twitter, learn to code, right? Like, and this might be the next thing that you might need to do, right? And this is something that Justin and I have been talking about a lot. There's a lot. It used to be that the demand for my class largely came from people that were already developers that wanted to get into this industry. We're seeing more and more in this bear market, a lot of Bitcoiners that aren't coders want to become coders. And that makes sense, because they want to understand what it is they're investing in. They want to contribute to the community. They want to become more technical, because they realize they need to level up their game, right? Like, enough of us level up, the whole community levels up. Second one is, I guarantee you, if you learn to code, it will be good for your career. It does not matter what position you have. You might think that most of the people that have taken my class are developers, or like at least like software engineer students or something like that. You would be wrong. I've had accountants take my class. I've had hedge fund managers take my class. I've had retirees that just wanted to thought it was cool, right? I've had venture capitalists that wanted to understand their investments better. I've had project managers. I've had all kinds of people. And the thing about learning to code is that it helps you. If you're a project manager that can read code, that makes a big difference, right? Now instead of they kind of know what's possible and what's not possible when you're bullshitting and when you're not, stuff like that. These are important skills, not just for coders, right? You might be a marketer, you might be CEO, you could be some guy doing help desk support, whatever it is. Coding will help you in your career. And finally, the thing that helps a lot is learning in groups, right? Because of that, what I would call the CrossFit effect of wanting to sort of keep up with everybody else. And if you have a really good group, and there's a lot of them online, where you can learn how to code Bitcoin with other people. Justin will talk more about that. That sort of thing helps, right? Because you get the group dynamics. You're sort of hacking the social animal inside you for your own benefit towards self-improvement, and that I think is a very important thing to use. Which brings me to my last point here, and this is teach. What I found is that people generally learn much better in groups. I've tried to teach one-on-one before, and yeah, they'll get it, and you can personalize it. But in groups, it tends to be there's a group dynamic that sort of starts happening as we progress through the 2 days of the seminar. Generally, you see people that might be falling behind or something like that, but then they start asking for help, and then other people will come in and try to teach them, and they start helping each other. And that's a very good thing, because not only do you harden your understanding by doing the actual code, you harden it even further by teaching somebody else, right? As they say, if you want to learn something, don't sit in a lecture, go teach it, right? Because you really have to know your stuff. You can get away on a final exam by knowing 25% of the material. You're not going to get away with teaching the same material, right? You have to learn 90% of it. And this is why I think diversity matters in any sort of classroom. And this is something that I learned after doing this a while. Most of my early classes, frankly, were men. And that's not surprising. I'm a man, and I know how to market to my demographic. I didn't really know how to market to women and stuff like that. And so I was talking to Elizabeth Sark about it, and she was like, you know what? I know how to market to women. Let's figure out how to do this. And she even got some scholarships for a bunch of women. And my favorite class to this day, I've taught, I think, 35 classes or something like that. My favorite one to this day was the one I held a year ago in New York, and that had a bunch of really badass coding women that came to my class, 37 people, and there were a couple things I noticed. First of all, it was a lot more fun for me to teach, right? Because they ask better questions from different perspectives, which forced me to clarify things with more rigor. And the other thing that I noticed was that they enjoyed it more too, right? There's a dynamic there, and because they have to teach each other, they can't just teach each other, the way that they learned it. They have to also sort of understand it from different perspectives, and that gives them a much more complete and rigorous understanding of what's going on. And what I found was that usually after the second day, we go out to a bar or something to relax after 2 days of very intense classes, and we hang out, we talk about Bitcoin or something, and it's a good time. Usually we hang out for 2-3 hours. What I found after that New York one was we hung out for 6 hours straight. We went all the way to 1 a.m. And this is after consensus, after 2 days of classes, and people were hanging out till 1 a.m. in the morning. I think they closed down the bar, so we had to go home. So the group dynamics were such that everyone bonded a lot better, in part because of the diversity. And that's something that I think is kind of underrated in sort of any learning environment, is that you get the right group of people it's a lot easier to learn. You're much more motivated to learn. The other thing that I recognize out of this, the other learning about teaching, is that people like explaining stuff. There's a lot of people that enjoy teaching others. Here are some people: Justin, Stepan Stingerev, Pierre Rochard, Hugo Wen. I don't know if you know all of these people, but they're pretty prominent on Twitter. Justin's gonna speak after me. Stepan has his own hardware wallet startup, and he's been teaching classes on how to do like hardware wallet stuff. Pierre's obviously been doing a lot of stuff with Lightning, and Hugo writes a bunch of articles on Medium. So they all enjoy explaining things to others. And I think they recognize that when you're forced to teach something, you really have to know it, right? It hardens it to the next level, right? All right, so, and by the way, they were all alumni of my class, all of these guys. And there's even more, including like Alex, can't remember his last name, but he does the Bitcoin Developers Network and other websites. And there's a bunch of other people who have gone on to different companies and done the same thing. And one of the things I always tell them is, you could take my material, please teach it wherever you want, right? Because that will really solidify the learning for you. Go back to your company and teach them the same thing, right? Go back to your meetup group, back in your hometown and teach them the same thing, right? Like, go through this stuff. When you have to code and then teach, that makes all of the difference. All right, so what does this mean for you? What does this mean for you? Well, first of all, teach in whatever capacity you can. Explain things to other people, right? Like, and it doesn't have to be code, right? It could be explaining what Bitcoin is to other people. And most of you probably already know that when you explain something to other people, it clarifies your thinking. It gives you a level of rigor about what it is that you're thinking about. Second, more subtle thing is that you have a defense when you learn to teach and explain things. You get sort of ridiculous statements by altcoiners and stuff like that. I think earlier this week, Ryan X. Charles claimed that the Lightning nodes were like money transmitters or something like that. And if you know how the technology works, you know he's being completely ridiculous, right? And when you can explain why, and when you can explain to other people, you have an effective defense against sort of ridiculous claims because you're used to explaining things to people and you have that clarity of thinking. And lastly, well, how do you do it? Well, go to meetups, right? Go and teach people and go and hang out with others. They might be at your level, under your level, above your level, whatever it is. Go and try to teach this stuff, give presentations, and so on. All right, so read, code, teach. Read, code, teach. Those are the things that I want you to understand, that this is how you level up your game. Recognize that understanding Bitcoin is hard. Now, Bitcoin is, in a sense, a simple system in that it doesn't add unneeded complexity to make it less secure. But it's still pretty hard. It's orders of magnitude less complicated than altcoins and stuff, but it's still pretty hard. And I recognize that reality. But that's why you need to go through that process, right? Read, code, teach. That's how you level up. We need to level up. And why do we need to level up? It's because the ecosystem is you. Okay, you have to recognize that Bitcoin is a decentralized system. We're not Ethereum. We don't all worship at the feet of Vitalik, right? We don't just trust what Vitalik says. Part of why all of these altcoins run on cults of personality is because they're so complicated that only like a few people actually know what the heck's going on, right? Or actually have the technical capacity or the time to look at everything to actually understand what's going on. And and it's reflective of a centralized system. And it's not only sort of technically centralized, it's like socially centralized, it's politically centralized, and so on. Because if you don't understand it technically, then it becomes, well, who do I trust, A or B, right? Who do I give my vote to, A or B? And it's not about the actual technical merits, it becomes a personality thing, right? And that's where politics comes in. That's not the road that we want to go down. But that is the road that every other altcoin is going down, right? Because they are centralized and they are building around trust of the people in charge. So that is to say, it's very important for the ecosystem to grow, right? Many of us run full nodes. Why? Because we want the network to be decentralized, right? At a technical level, it's important for us to level up so that we can evaluate things properly, right? So that we keep Bitcoin a meritocracy, and it doesn't become this trust game or a politics game, which every other altcoin is going through. The ecosystem is you guys. The ecosystem is you guys. And if we level up our game, if we have a deeper understanding as a community about what Bitcoin actually is, then we level up Bitcoin. We level up Bitcoin, right? Many of us, didn't really understand Bitcoin when we first came in. But as we learned more and more about it, we understood it better and better. We were able to talk to others about it. And we were able to have more conviction about what it is. It's good for you. It's good for the ecosystem. It's a win-win, right? Read, code, teach. Ultimately, if you improve yourself, you will improve Bitcoin. And that's the big thing that I want to impress upon you, is that it doesn't happen sort of magically. It happens through hard work. And you're kind of incentivized to do it because you're going to learn a lot more about it and have more conviction about it. We're not like some hedge fund manager that puts it into the top 10 altcoins. There's no way that they know the technical details of like the 9th most popular coin, right? I mean, very few people do. And they're just sort of playing that trust game. That's not the game we're playing. We're playing a game where it's a meritocracy, where it's really decentralized. We're not playing that centralized game. These are some books to get you started on the reading, coding, teaching. So you can kind of see, it starts with the right side is sort of more economic space. Bitcoin Standard, Bitcoin Money, one's for adults, one's for children. And then the middle one is sort of like in between. Like if you're comfortable enough with this column, then you can like move on to this column, which is grokking Bitcoin, inventing Bitcoin. These are sort of technical explanations, but you don't need to know how to code to do it. And this last column is more for coders. Obviously, my book is there, Programming Bitcoin, and Andreas's book is there, Mastering Bitcoin. But these are some good books to get started with and to level up your game. I really hope that you guys do that. All right.